Good afternoon. Today I'll be reading an overview on lessons from Ferguson, court debt collection in Wisconsin, Missouri, and nationwide. Milwaukee Center for Driver's License Recovery and Employability will talk about who we are, what we do, and how our work is important in Wisconsin and is connected to nationwide trends. The uprising and sustained community movement in Ferguson, Missouri, starting in 2014, raised national consciousness around the harms of police ticketing and court debt collection practices. That activism led to an investigation and a scathing report from the U.S. Department of Justice, followed by outreach to courts nationwide. Greater scrutiny of court debt collection practices followed, resulting in a nationwide wave of court debt collection reforms. In the last 5 years, at least 22 states have repealed laws that allowed courts to use driver license suspensions, warrants, and incarceration to collect unpaid ticket debt. Many have studied court debt collection practices in Wisconsin and have raised concerns that the driver's license suspensions and warrants and incarceration used in our state to collect debt are ineffective and harmful, especially to people of color and people experiencing poverty. The reforms enacted in other states may provide some guidance for Wisconsin. And at this time, I turn it over for our discussion to Jay Tucker and Susan Lund.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll probably be sitting and standing as we get used to this hybrid model of virtual and in person. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jay Tucker. I'm the Director of Workforce Initiatives and Supportive Services for Wisconsin Community Services. Wisconsin Community Services is a large nonprofit that has been around for over 100 years. We have programming and sites all across Wisconsin. Specifically, I work in job development and management. I manage the adult and youth job training and placement programs, the supportive services needed to retain and attain those jobs, and the Center for Driver's License Recovery and Employability.
I'm Susan Lund. I'm the supervising attorney at the Center for Driver's License Recovery and Employability. I work for Legal Action of Wisconsin. I've been doing this work for 8 years now. Thank you so much for joining us in person and online.
Okay, so we're hopefully going to make this kind of a conversation and a dialogue today. We're hoping to, as the hostess kind of said, we're going to talk about who we are, what we do, and why the work what we do kind of parallels with the repetitive cycle of debt collection, especially in the Milwaukee Municipal courts, but in Wisconsin courts. So this debt, it affects primarily people of low income, particularly in Black and Brown communities, specifically African-American and Hispanic. So we're hoping today to give you some more insight about the work that we do. If you know people that need our services, we have some information in the back so they can sign up for services, or you can grab some of our literature so you can send people our way. And hopefully maybe as we present more information to you, we might develop some allies in this so that as the needed changes that need to happen around this, we may gain some more traction. Our presentation has been uploaded on that WOVA app. So if we give you a lot of statistics and things of that nature, you can always go back to that presentation for more information. Okay. So let's go ahead and get going about who we are. Technology. It doesn't want to do it. All right. Try to do, okay, who we are. We are affectionately known as CDLRE, Center for Driver's License Recovery and Employability. We were founded more than 10 years ago, specifically in 2007, with our lead agency, which is Wisconsin Community Services, Milwaukee Area Technical College, Legal Action of Wisconsin, and the City of Milwaukee. Primarily, the center was founded because they saw a disproportionate amount of driver's license suspensions in low-income areas. So the founders of the program saw, and they knew that the mission was to increase the number of valid driver's licenses in Milwaukee County. We do this by providing driver's license assistance to low-income people, expansion of driver's education for low-income students, public policy improvements, and increased education about license suspensions and revocations. So overall, again, our mission is to aid low-income families and educate the community about what's going on and join the fight in any legislative needs and any policy needs that happen so that this doesn't continue to occur. So that's a little bit about who we are. In addition, the work that we've done since 2007, we've helped over 4,000 people obtain their driver's licenses, and we've helped over 7,000 people with their driver's license restoration plans. This is something that we call advice. So again, since 2007, we call it obtain a valid license. We've helped over 4,000 people and 7,000 of those with a license restoration plan. And that's simply, a lot of times people may come to us and they may not know what to do. Sometimes it's as simple as maybe they just need to pay off that suspension. Sometimes it's simple as they need to make a call to this office so that they can do this or that. So if they don't want to fully enroll into our program and get the case management and legal services needed, sometimes it's something that they can do on their own. So again, that's what we call license recovery advice. Behind the numbers. So what this is just a simple success story about someone that has, obtained their license through our program. We kind of gave a highlight to Dwight, but Dwight, the person on the screen, is one of the many stories that we hear in people that need our services. It's people that come to us and their licenses are suspended and they look up and they wonder how they've accumulated this much debt, and they wonder what they are going to do. They find their licenses suspended and they're like, how am I going to take my kids to school? How am I in fear of losing my job because my job depends on me to drive? How am I going to get from point A to B? Am I going to get to work? Can I get to school? This is a story that we hear so often with people that come through our office. And it's not funny, but one of the things that happens is we hear people that say, oh, why don't they just pay the bill? Why don't they just do this? And my favorite, why don't they just pick themselves up by them bootstraps and just get that done? And I'm like, a lot of times it's not quite that simple. Just to add a little bit more insight to it, research has showed that in Milwaukee, a living wage is considered someone who makes between $14.50 to maybe about $31 an hour, depending upon how many children you have. In Milwaukee County, the average wage goes from about $7.50 to about $14.25. So it doesn't take an expert to do the math to say, hey, if people aren't even making the living wage, depending upon how many children they have, if I have to pay my rent, my mortgage, keep my phone on, find transportation, that traffic ticket may not make it to the high priority list of bills, and then starts the cycle of debt that I'm owed because the tickets keep growing. And what my colleague will talk about, Susan, is how that court debt just begins to pile up. A person is suspended and then they get suspended again for driving while suspended. So again, this presentation today is not about the living wage debt, but just to provide some insight into a lot of times people aren't able to pay this because they don't have the money. And the cycle of debt that comes through these sanctions from the court is not needed. And it's not found, as Susan is pointing out, it's not found to be the solution as to what happens. Next, how does a person get connected to our services? So a couple of ways is who qualifies for our program. First being is, we always say, again, it's low income. So a person has to meet the federal poverty guidelines. And it has to be for a Wisconsin Class D license. Now, a lot of times people will come to us and they may, have some issues in Chicago. They may have some issues in Minnesota. Now we're able to point people hopefully in the right direction and maybe give them some advice on what to do, what to look for. But Susan, correct me, our our attorneys are licensed for the state of Wisconsin. Legal Action does have offices around the state of Wisconsin. So if there's other people that need assistance outside of Milwaukee County, they can always contact Legal Action to see what can be happened or maybe where they can go in those other counties. But we specifically handle Wisconsin Class D driver's license, but we will help anybody we can as far as pointing them in the right direction. You must be a Milwaukee County resident. Again, the research behind what we've done and where the program was founded, found the greater need in Milwaukee County. So again, all of the funding, everything we do is based on people being a resident of that county. Next is OWI. And if I say something wrong, Susan, please feel free to jump in. So OWI, operating while intoxicated. So when a person receives a revocation for OWI and they have current or pending charges around OWI, there are so many other legal ramifications around it that we're not able to assist them in the program unless they are at the point of getting their license where they just need to take an assessment. So if a person has an OWI and then to get to the next step of getting their license, they're on the path of they're just needing to get that assessment, we can work with them in our program. But if there's other legal ramifications around the OWI, they still have some court cases open and some things pending. There are some legal things that kind of take place, right, Susan? And they need to get those things squared away first before we can start any other steps by enrolling them into our program, and obtaining a license. Lastly, if there's no valid license in the last 8 years, a person must complete a knowledge test. Simply, you can't get your license if you don't pass the written test. So if we go and do all the things that we need to do to get your license and you can't even pass the written test, it's kind of a moot point, So again, if a person has been suspended, never had a license, or it's been more than 8 years, they need to be able to pass that written test. Once they pass that written test, then we will gladly enroll them in our program and our services to be able to go to the next step. Again, they must be able to pass that written test. And then at the bottom of the screen is just Legal Action's phone number because they do have offices across Wisconsin. Anything else?
Our attorneys don't do OWI defense. We help people resolve suspensions caused by poverty and things like that, but we can't help you with the pending OWI.
Okay. Just to break it up a little bit before we get into some deeper stuff, I always like to throw a quiz out there. So we do have, we got some candy in the back and we have these cool, we under a lot of stress. So we have these cool cars that are cool to sit on your desk at work or home or just for stress. So the quiz is, in Wisconsin, over the last 10 years, what percentage of driver's license suspensions were caused by unpaid ticket debt, which is also considered failure to pay forfeitures? How many? What would be a guess? Anybody? 65%? Okay, that's a guess. Anyone else? 70%? We got another car. Susan, to give you a car. You were right. Almost 60% of driver's license suspensions were ordered to try to collect unpaid ticket debt. These suspensions have nothing to do with traffic safety. The only purpose is to collect debt. Again, almost 60% of the suspensions in Wisconsin are due to unpaid ticket debt, not traffic safety. Okay? Another fun fact or sad fact, however you want to look at it. Quiz. In Wisconsin in 2018, how many driver's license suspensions were enforced to try to get an individual to pay on ticket debt? So again, how many people total do you think were suspended in 2018 for failure to pay ticket? 1 year, just for 1 year, 12 months. 2,500. Okay, we got 2,500. Anybody else want to guess how many people were suspended in 1 year just for unpaid ticket debt? 600. Okay, 243,333 people. Almost 250,000 people, and this is always the number one reason, almost 250,000 people were suspended for unpaid paid ticket debt. Not even close. Staggering, isn't it? So again, this is why we do the work that we do. And just to mention, in the program's inception in 2007, a lot of the initial founders, they didn't think that the program would be around this long. They say, hey, we saw this program in 2007. This happened, we're noticed, people are getting, disproportionately have licenses. We can start this program, get some awareness, get some legislation, get all of these things done. And this probably will clear itself up. Here we are 10 plus years later, and we still have statistics like this. Okay, so again, that's why it's important for us. Again, when we got the opportunity to want to speak at today's conference around poverty, this is evident of how we continue the cycle of poverty, especially when we get to the demographics of who owes this money. Okay. Next, why a driver's license matters. Before I started this work, I didn't really grasp the importance of a driver's license. I got my license when I was 16. I always had a license. When I apply for a job, I can check the box to say I can get a license. When people ask me for my ID, I give them my license as a form of ID. When I'm looking for insurance quotes, I can give my number for license for ID. When I moved here to Wisconsin from St. Louis, I was able to work in areas like Menominee Falls, Brookfield with no problem because I had a valid driver's license. And then when I switched to my human services work that I do now, and I was in direct service, I had to drive around adults, kids, wherever. I didn't have a fear that, I might lose my job because I don't have a valid license because my employer can't add me to their insurance plan. So these are some of the things that you don't think about. And that these things on the screen, if you look at some of these statistics, 80% of people in Wisconsin drive themselves to work. It's just a fact. 30% of the jobs require driving, okay? In Southeast Wisconsin, a number of the jobs are outside of the bus commute. Part of the other work I do is around job placement and training, and specifically with our returning citizens. So a lot of times, the jobs that I'm able to get them are not in their neighborhood. They're not in the other surrounding communities. They may be way out, which is outside of the bus lines. And we don't have a transportation system, whatever. We got a trolley. Okay, that's a whole nother stuff. Well, we don't have a transportation system to get them there. So again, that is important. 42% of people lost their job due to a driver's license. And then when they found that they didn't have a driver's license, the whole time that they were suspended, they were still not able to work, okay? And many job applications require a valid license. In the times we live in, having a job, having a driver's license is like second nature. So when people don't have access to one, you have a group of individuals that feel targeted and they feel like they are without options, okay? Now let's get into reckless driving, okay? This, my colleague and I, Susan, I said, we can't have a presentation about driver's license recovery without mentioning what we know is going on today in our communities with reckless driving. So as we said, let's address the elephant in the room, more like the loaded weapon in the room. Our presentation today and the information we want to give you today, we do want to say suspended driving and suspended driver's license is not the same as reckless driving. To speak in my personal opinion, the reckless driving issue is a community, health, and public safety issue and concern. That is a multi-layered problem that is going to take a multi-layered approach to be able to get any type of long-term, short-term, and immediate effects. So again, our presentation today and the information today is to let you know that suspended driver's license, or the mass amount of suspended driver's license, is not the same as reckless driving. I was actually listening to I listen to 860 a lot, and I was listening to 860 last Friday. Actually, Homer Blow was filling in for Keith's show, which is Community Voices. And so they were talking about reckless driving, and some of the callers called in and they said, well, these people just need a driver's license. And so I was like, okay. The individuals, young or old, that are zigzagging down the street, running red lights, driving through school properties, young or old, they don't give a damn about the rules of the road. Something else is going on there. Something else is going on there. It's not the rules of the road. It's not because they didn't take the written driving exam. And like I said earlier, it's a multi-layer problem where we need to get our public school systems involved, our law enforcement, civic engagement, as well as local politics and legislation. It's a multi-pronged issue. It's not because they didn't know what a stop sign was, you know. So again, a word is that Wisconsin chooses to suspend driver's licenses for many reasons that are not related to traffic safety. Most driver's license suspensions in Wisconsin are not caused by unsafe driving. They are suspended for unpaid traffic ticket debt. Driver suspensions were originally intended to punish and to protect us from unsafe drivers, but it's been diluted because it's been overwhelmed. You get suspended just for not paying your traffic tickets. They have went driver's license suspensions to collect decreases traffic safety. We have a note here from the American Vehicle operators. They've been calling for debt-based suspensions to be eliminated since 2013. The massive use of debt-based driver's license, it dilutes the seriousness of driver's license suspensions in the eyes of the public, police, and the courts. When police enforce suspended driving violations, their resources are diverted from traffic safety violations. And again, I also just heard on the radio this morning that on 860, we can tune in on Friday. Michelle Bryan is having a special. She's going to have the interim police chief on her show on Friday, or a segment of the show on Friday about 10 a.m. to talk about, what's going on with traffic safety. Is there traffic safety enforcement? So again, the driver's license program, we do support initiatives around safe driving. We have Taffy can wave her hand. She's a part of the city's reckless driving task force. We attend community events and other things around safe driving. So wherever we can be to be a part of the solution, we are, but we just wanted to make it clear that suspended driver's license for debt collection is not the same as reckless driving. Driver's license suspensions in Wisconsin specifically. This information may surprise some, but for those of us that live in the inner city, it's no wonder to us that African Americans hold a majority of the driver's license suspensions. If we look at the statistics that are on the board, since 2007, over 89,000 drivers have had their licenses revoked or suspended. One out of every six, over half of them who have never had a license. But the disparity is that over 80% of the Latinx and Black adults have had their license suspended over white adults. Another disparity showed that in a study in 2012, Black men were 4.5 times more likely to have a suspended driver's license than white men, and Latinx men were 3.2 more likely to have a suspended license. Studies also show that drivers with license suspensions is heavily concentrated in lower income Milwaukee neighborhoods. because most suspensions are issued for for forfeitures, not for unsafe driving. Again, 2/3 of the suspensions in Milwaukee for failure to pay forfeitures, 1 out of every 6, over 80%, included the demographics of Black and brown people. And to add to that, more statistics. 2019, Black drivers, again, if we fast forward to 2018, in 2019, Black drivers were 1 in 8 times more likely than white drivers to be pulled over. In 2020, 9.5 times more likely to be pulled over. In 2020, Hispanic and Latinx people were almost 3 times as more likely than white people to be pulled over. So if all of the Black and brown people are being pulled over, then it's no wonder that the debt that is owed is concentrated and heaped on Black and brown people. From 2012 to 2016, the court had over $31 million. $31 million of the in Milwaukee court had $31 million in unpaid debt. Over $23 million of the $31 million debt was held by Black people. Okay. Sanctions for non-payment of court debt enforced against Black and brown and other people. Again, a 2012 study shows Black men were 4.5 times more likely to have suspended driver's license than white men. Now, just to add a little bit to the disparities, $23 million was owed to Milwaukee courts. Black people, just the municipal court, thank you. Just the municipal court, $23 million was owed just to municipal court. 73% of that debt was consumed by Black people. The highest amount of the outstanding debt is in the zip codes you see here. So even if, again, this is available, if you see the 53209s, the 210s, the 206, the 208s. So that $23 million worth of debt were concentrated in the highest communities of color and the highest communities that already have the poverty. And then if we go back to when I was mentioning, we were talking about a success around the white story. If I'm only making $10 an hour and I'm trying to, or if I'm getting a job, or if I'm a returning citizen and I still have all these other obligations that I'm trying to meet, piling on top of that, the unpaid traffic ticket debt, what are we doing here? What are we really doing here? What are we really trying to get to with this? The problem in Wisconsin is nationwide. And as we get into the next couple of slides, the uprising in Ferguson, Missouri was, again, incredibly important to shining a nationwide spotlight on the over-policing and pulling over of people of color and all of the court debt that was accumulated from those suspensions and other things. Again, staggering. You probably got questions. You know, as I get into my last 2 slides before I turn it over to Susan, she's going to get into more of the legal stuff, and more of the stuff that drove and is driving the legal ramifications around all of this and the DOJ investigation. But, as we were putting this presentation together, I always take pause. Like I literally take pause. And when I got to this part, I always have to take a breath. Mentioned earlier, I'm a native of St. Louis, Missouri. So I've had an apartment in Ferguson, right out of undergrad. I had family, friends, and the neighboring cities in St. Louis, it's kind of like here. Like if you're in Milwaukee, you're going to Brown Deer. You're in Milwaukee, you're going to Wauwatosa, Glendale, what have you. So you have the city, then you have all these surrounding counties around it. So you drive one place 5 minutes, you drive in another place. So I always I have pause, and I get slightly, I don't get slightly, I get emotional. And I get emotional not because I'm sad, because I'm tired. I At times I am mentally and physically exhausted. Um at what happens and what can happen. Um, just to add a note before I get into more of the Ferguson case, about 2 weeks ago, um, a friend of mine called me. 42-year-old Black woman, lived in Wisconsin, Milwaukee all her life. Um, she moved to the Nashville, Tennessee area. So she was taking her son to school, to work. He works again in a neighboring town. He was taking him to work, and she was coming from dropping him off, hopped on the highway, and police flash. She's getting pulled over. She's like, "Oh my gosh, was I speeding? What's going on? The things that go to your head when you get ready to get pulled over." And she pulls over to the shoulder of the highway, and the cop is getting out of the car, and he immediately unlocks the holster on his weapon. So my friend is sitting in her car. She never has had a traffic ticket, any other violations. She drives like an off-road Jeep Cherokee, has plates, stickers, like nothing that would seem to send a red flag. So the cop gets out the car, unbuckles the weapon, and begins to walk towards her car. Again, my friend, 42-year-old Black woman, dark skin, began growing locks, hair kind of looks like mine, and the cop proceeds to walk up to the car. And she's in panic mode because she's like, why is his hand on his weapon? She rolls the window down halfway as he begins to approach the car. And the cop looked inside and said, "Ugh, you a woman." It kind of smiled and shrugged. And she's like, "What?" And she was like, why are you pulling me over? What is going on? He's like, "License and registration." So, and she said again, "Why are you pulling me over?" And he was like, "Oh, your sticker wasn't showing." Some very like just obtruse statement. And in that moment, she knew that that officer thought, that person thought at that time, she was a Black male driving this vehicle in this suburban part of town. "What are you doing over here?" And when he got to the window and found out she was a woman, I guess he was less threatened. And kind of, she said, shrugged and did, kind of a sigh. And she said, my friend said, she said, "I immediately had a panic attack, pulled over, and I just cried." And we were on the phone just crying. Like, we are 2021, and we still drive with a level of fear. And 10 and 2, let me make sure my hands are being seen. And then again, we are law-abiding, tax-paying citizens, and we still have people um, that have these type of tactics. And again, before I get into Ferguson real quick, just I listened to this podcast, and there and on this podcast is hosted by this singer named Jill Scott. And so the short version is, she had an actress on there by the name of Lynn Whitfield. Lynn Whitfield is a very popular Black actress. She's been around the world doing opera performances for years. She is used to having a driver or an assistant take care of her things, but she moved to a new part of town, and she was on the podcast talking about it. And she said, "I need to run to Target. I need to go to Target. I need to pick up something." And she's on the podcast talking about, she said, "Before I ran to Target," she was like, "I had to check myself to make sure my license wasn't expired, or the car that I was going to drive had the right plates or tickets. Because even though I'm Lynn Whitfield, I've been in this business over 30 years, some would have some reasonable money. I could get pulled over at any second and something else, it could go awry. Um, again, I just bring this up as instances of things that we feel. When I say we, people of color may feel every day as we're going through what is considered now, or the buzzwords of predatory policing and etc. Moving forward, on August 9th, 2014, Michael Brown, an unarmed Black teenager, was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. The community erupted, as they should, sustained demonstrations calling for the end of police violence in the community. Those demonstrations and those eruptions, the community went further to say, hey, we need to stop this perpetual cycle of systemic racism that's going on where we at. It's in the policing system, it's in the courts, etc. So, like the last bullet says, community members demanded change in how the municipal courts and targeted Black residents, trapping them into a cycle of police scrutiny and debt. The Missouri municipalities, like the one in Ferguson, heavily relied on courts for revenue, as in many other towns like Louisiana, Texas, Georgia, Oklahoma. Many municipalities in these places receive 10% or more of their budgets based off of the fines and fees that were assessed to people. As a result of the criticism, the U.S. Department of Justice did an investigation on the police department in Ferguson and the municipal courts. And this is what sparked it should have been sparked a long time ago, but this is what sparked at this time kind of the chain reaction of, hey, what are these municipal courts doing? What is all this debt that's being charged? Why does it seem like it's only affecting people of color? My colleague Susan is going to go a little bit more into about that DOJ investigation and some of the legal aspects around how this cycle continues and what we can do.
Thank you so much, Jay. Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to talk about some of what that report said, right? The U.S. Department of Justice heard what the community said, and they decided to investigate. And these are government bureaucrats, right? They don't normally write inflammatory reports, but what they wrote is really alarming. They wrote a scathing report of Ferguson's policing and their municipal court. And amongst other things, that report described the Ferguson Police Department, prosecution, and local court system as filled with rampant constitutional violations, intentional racism, and the blatant pursuit of revenue. So that report concluded that Ferguson's law enforcement practices are shaped by the city's focus on revenue rather than by public safety needs. This emphasis on revenue has compromised the institutional character of Ferguson's police department, contributing to a pattern of unconstitutional policing, and has also shaped its municipal court, leading to procedures that raise due process concerns and inflict unnecessary harm on members of the Ferguson community. So that report raised concerns with the way that the municipal court charged debt to people, specifically Black people, the way that the court used warrants as a debt collection mechanism and not as a way to protect public safety. It raised a lot of concerns and is worth taking a look at. But it was so disturbed, the US Department of Justice was so disturbed by what it found that it sent a letter to every court system in the United States, to the director of state courts all across the United States. It was called the Dear Colleague letter, just saying like, hey, municipal courts, non-criminal courts have to meet certain standards when they're collecting debt. They have to protect people's constitutional rights. They shouldn't be throwing people in debtor's prison and, you know, using a vast amount of warrants and driver's license suspensions to collect debt without making sure that people's rights are protected. So in Wisconsin, notably, soon after this report was received, our own director of state courts began a review of court debt collection practices. And we're going to talk more about those results later, but I'll give you a preview. It said that not only are driver's license suspensions and warrants harmful to the people who suffer under those sanctions for non-payment, but they're ineffective. They're not effective debt collection tools. So I just want to put that in your mind early on, but we will get to more specifics later. So we talked a bit about, you know, what the municipal court looked like in Ferguson. Let's talk about what happens in municipal court in Wisconsin. So I practice a lot in municipal court, and I don't know if we specifically said it, but municipal courts cannot hear criminal matters, right? Everything in municipal court is a ticket. It's a non-criminal ticket. It can be a traffic ticket, it can be a non-traffic ticket, but none of these things are criminal. They are low-level offenses, and the punishment for these low-level offenses is a financial one. So you get charged money for violating the law. That's how municipal court works. And so if you get a ticket and are found guilty, right, or you don't go to court and are found guilty by default, you have options if you appear in court in what's called a poverty hearing or an ability to pay hearing. You have the right to request community service or an affordable installment plan, or you can ask the court to modify the judgment to reduce the debt to something more affordable to you. You can also ask for a stay of the judgment, which would be zeroing out the debt. The judge doesn't have to do what you ask, but you have a right to ask, and the court is required to consider it. What happens a lot is that people don't go to court, right? So most people are found guilty by default in municipal court. Like 70% of people are just found guilty when they don't show up for their court date. And then if they also don't request or appear at a poverty hearing, the court has a lot of authority to collect that debt. So the first one is the tax refund intercept program. If you've ever had, you know, some outstanding debt and you were due a tax refund from the state, they can just intercept that money. They can snatch it from your refunds before the government gives it to you. Another thing that can happen is the court can now refer debt to the state debt collection agency, which is an arm of the Department of Revenue. So the Department of Revenue can then garnish your wages. They can levy your bank account. And I've certainly had clients who went to go pay their rent or went to go buy groceries, and their bank account had been levied and cleared out by the Department of Revenue for some unpaid ticket debt, which again comes with a lot of charges, a lot of fees associated with that. The courts can also use private debt collection agencies. And then what we're going to talk about more specifically today even is the driver's license suspensions and warrants or writs of commitment. So the courts can use driver's license suspensions as a tool to collect unpaid ticket debt, as you know, Jay talked about a lot. And they can use warrants and incarceration to collect that unpaid ticket debt. So the way the driver's license suspension works is you miss your due date. Many courts just automatically send out a driver's license suspension to the DOT, which will suspend your license for 1 year or until the debt is paid or resolved with the court. So it's a 1-year driver's license suspension. And the whole purpose of it, again, is to coerce payment from you, to make you come to court and pay that debt. It used to be 2 years. At one point it was 5 years. At one point it was 90 days or something like that. But currently it's 1 year. And so I also just want to point out that for a first time OWI, you know, the low end of the revocation for operating while intoxicated is 6 months. So if you operate while intoxicated, you might have a 6-month license revocation. But if you don't pay a ticket for unregistered vehicle and you still can't afford to pay that ticket, that might be a year-long driver's license suspension. So we can think about whether that makes sense as well. The other thing that happens it can happen on a traffic ticket or a non-traffic ticket is the warrant or incarceration. So what happens there is a court will see that you've missed a due date and they will issue a warrant, which can be for your arrest or can be for your incarceration. And so if they issue one for incarceration, which is called a writ of commitment, what happens is if you get stopped by the police and you can't pay that debt in full on the spot, or you can't get someone to show up real quick with that money, you serve that debt in jail at a rate of no less than $50 per day. So you satisfy your debt through your loss of liberty. You satisfy a non-criminal ticket debt through loss of liberty. Oh, so I covered a bunch of this already, right? So these are automatic things in many courts. Many of them are automated and computerized. And again, the purpose is to coerce the payment. So the tickets that can lead to a driver's license suspension can be an unregistered vehicle ticket, operating without insurance. It could be speeding, operating while suspended. It doesn't matter whether the traffic ticket is related to safety or unrelated to safety. If it's unpaid and past due, the court can use a driver's license suspension to collect it. And again, it's really significant that people of color and people experiencing poverty are much, much, much more likely to have driver's license suspensions caused by non-payment of tickets. And the studies also show that as rates of unemployment go up, rates of debt-based driver's license suspensions increase, which again reflects the conclusion that the less money people have, the more likely they are to suffer a driver's license suspension for non-payment. And I know we've showed you this chart before, but it never ceases to outrage me that this is what we're doing with our driver's license suspensions in Wisconsin. Most of them are to collect debt. And over the last 10 years, we're talking 2 million in Wisconsin. 2 million driver's license suspensions for failure to pay forfeitures. An additional 132,000 for failure to pay juvenile tickets. And this is just, magnitudes more than the safety related suspension. So demerit point suspensions are the typical safety related suspension in Wisconsin. It eclipses the amount of safety related suspensions. And you can see also from this chart that there's almost 200 different ways you could have lost your license over the last decade. That's how many different types of suspensions there are in Wisconsin. But that one, well, those two there make up more than half the pie. And again, so then what happens, right? So they're ordering driver's license suspensions to try to get people to satisfy outstanding debt. But what happens? We know that 80% of people in Wisconsin drive to work. We know that people, don't have great public transportation options to get to where a lot of the jobs are, oftentimes at third shift or oftentimes cobbling together different jobs and caring for kids. And people continue to drive, and operating while suspended in the state of Wisconsin is the second most issued traffic ticket. In Milwaukee for years, it was the most issued traffic ticket. So, they're operating while suspended. So people have their licenses suspended for unpaid debt. They try to get to work to earn the money to pay that debt. They get pulled over again, they get more debt. And so this is the cycle of poverty right here. And so this is some of the information from the Director of State Courts, right? The Director of State Courts found, so the Director of State Courts received this Dear Colleague letter from the Department of Justice. They start reviewing whether these are effective debt collection tools and how the courts are collecting debt. And in 2018, the Director of State Courts, again, this is a government bureaucrat, not a radical person, right? They're not, they're just looking at the evidence. They're saying there's no evidence to show that driver's license suspensions are effective in collecting unpaid traffic ticket debt. And in fact, counties who use driver's license suspensions to collect unpaid traffic ticket debt collect less. So it's ineffective, it's counterproductive. And again, the Director of State Courts pointed out that driver's license suspensions lead to reduced employability, increased police contact, and more government debt. So they end up creating more debt and more problems instead of resolving them oftentimes. And again, so this is the chart, the red line is where in counties where suspensions are high, they're collecting less debt. So it's an ineffective debt collection mechanism. And now we're going to get into warrants, right? So as I mentioned, another huge debt collection tool are warrants. And these often go out for unpaid traffic tickets and also for other non-criminal forfeiture convictions. So like a loitering ticket, a curfew ticket, a disorderly conduct ticket, all non-criminal. So if you miss your court date, they can issue a warrant for your arrest. And if you think you don't have any, you just might want to check that Milwaukee Municipal Court website, because I don't know how many people I've told over my career that they have active warrants that they didn't know about. So the number of active municipal warrants in Wisconsin has not been quantified, but there are some places that make that public. So I took a look. I don't know where the city or town of Marietta is, but I haven't heard of them, and they have 820 active warrants. The city of New London, 150 active warrants. Mid-Moraine Municipal Court, which is in our area, had almost 1,000 active warrants on any given day, right? Wisconsin Dells Municipal Court, 250 active warrants. Milwaukee Municipal Court has had in 2011, which is the last date they published this information, 40% of the cases they adjudicated or resolved had active warrants. And in 2020, that turned out to be more than 56,000 active warrants in Milwaukee for unpaid ticket debt. So who's impacted by this? People of color, right? Black people are significantly disproportionately impacted, and people experiencing poverty. So there's only one study that I know of in Wisconsin that looked at this issue, but from 2008 to 2013, over 9,000 people did time in Milwaukee County Jail for unpaid ticket debt. That's in our county alone. And Milwaukee County has a 30% Black population, but 78% of people who were incarcerated on unpaid ticket debts were Black. Most of the individuals were coming from zip codes with concentrated poverty. The majority of people were unemployed, and those who were employed worked at low-wage jobs. Worked being important because those people likely lost their jobs when they suddenly didn't show up for work, right? And the study pointed out specifically that a large percentage of people who were jailed had been jailed for non-payment of traffic tickets, and those were operating while suspended tickets, and that the vast majority of those had been suspended because they couldn't afford to pay ticket debt. So, the headline ran, "Does Milwaukee County run a debtor's prison?" And, it is very disturbing information in this study. So what did the director of state courts found? Are these effective debt collection tools? No. So there was like a slight, less than 1% increase in collection rate for counties that used warrants to collect unpaid debt. But the study found that incarcerating people to collect unpaid ticket debt was not effective to coerce payment or to change behavior, because 77% of people who had served time on unpaid debt had multiple bookings for that reason. So they also, had an increase of less than 1% in collection rates. So it's generally not considered cost effective, as it cost almost 6 times more to incarcerate the person than the debt that they're even trying to collect. So this is an expensive tool to use and an ineffective one again. The director of state courts also pointed out that jailing individuals has a negative impact on their ability or willingness to pay their legal financial obligations even after release. So, and that's often because this is making their situation worse. It's harming their employment prospects. It's, if they had a job, they're losing it. It's a record of incarceration. And overwhelmingly, the people who are serving time will be experiencing poverty, as will their support network. So these are people who, they can't afford to pay the ticket, but they also don't have someone they could call in to show up with a couple $100s to resolve the issue for them either. And again, Black people are disproportionately impacted. So what's happening? Now that we've got all this national consciousness that's been raised as a result of the Ferguson uprising and the US Department of Justice report, has anything good happened? Well, actually, there has been a wave of state law changes. Since 2017, so in the last 5 years, 23 states now have repealed laws that allow judges to collect debt through driver's license suspension. And a wide range of states, right? We've got Mississippi, Illinois, Minnesota, Colorado, California, Oregon. So we've got red states, we've got blue states, coast to coast, Midwest. And there have also been states repealing laws allowing for debt-based warrants and incarceration. So Nevada and Missouri have said, we're gonna, put an end to these debtors' prisons. These are minor tickets. We don't want people serving time on them. We don't think it's cost effective. We don't think it's, ethical to do this anymore. So we are gonna take away the judge's authority to do that. So this is, this is a big change in a short time. This is a really significant movement that has happened out of this consciousness that was raised, I would say. And who supports these law changes? Nonpartisan organizations, historically conservative organizations, historically progressive organizations, legal associations, government, again, the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators. We're talking DMV employees. They're not radical. They just don't think that that's what their organization should be used for, to collect debt. They should be enforcing traffic safety. The American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, we often hear a lot about, as a very conservative organization. The ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, very progressive. Americans for Prosperity, so historically funded by the Koch brothers. Just a really wide range of organizations agree that this is not how we should be using police, jails, DMVs anymore. So there are just a wide variety of organizations that have called on states to rethink laws. What about Wisconsin? No news from Wisconsin to share. In 2019, in the legislative session, Representative David Crowley, who's now the Milwaukee County executive, he introduced a bill to eliminate non-safety driver's license suspension. So a bill to say, if it's not safety related, we can't suspend your driver's license for it. That didn't succeed. In this legislative session, as of October, there's nothing been proposed in Wisconsin that I'm aware of to eliminate debt-based driver's license suspensions or ticket debt-based warrants and incarceration. So I didn't know when we proposed this in the beginning what we would say here, and no news to share from Wisconsin, unfortunately. Yeah, so we wanted to certainly, I don't know what our time is like, but if people have questions, I'd love to take them, and we wanted to make sure that you can get in contact with us, visit our website, and there's a document back there to sign up if you need assistance, but please share our information with anybody who might want to enroll in our program to resolve driver's license suspensions, especially those caused by poverty.
Thank you for listening.
Any questions? Oh yes, we have it.
Let's give Jay and Susan a hand for that very informative information that we've all received, because it can benefit us all, right?
Yeah, so I guess I had two questions. I guess my first question is, what is the end goal? Because, like they were saying, the bill for non-safety related violations didn't get passed. So without revocation, which I don't agree with, how do they ensure that, some of these debts get paid? And then, oh yeah, sorry. And my second question in the beginning, you said there was about 7,000 people came through your organization to get the plans and how to get their licenses back. I guess how many people of those 7,000, if you have that, follow up on their plan to get their license back?
Yeah, so people sometimes wring their hands and they say, what will happen, right? But as I pointed out, the courts have so much authority to collect this debt. If people have money, they will get it. The tax refund intercept alone is a really easy solution. They don't have to do anything. It doesn't cost them any money. And if somebody has money coming back to them, which, a lot of people do, they will get it. If they want to be really aggressive about it, they can garnish their wages or levy their bank account. This would not impact their ability to collect debt in that way. We can talk about whether they should be, and that's a different conversation. But, there are ways for them to collect this money that are really much more cost effective, much less harmful, and lead to less of a cycle of poverty and accumulation of debt. So they have other options that are very powerful. If our legislature took away a judge's authority to suspend someone's driver's license or throw them in jail to collect this debt, as we've seen, it's not very effective anyways. They have other effective tools that they can use.
Yeah, and on the first question is, um, the 4,000 is the number of people who've had full enrollment into the program. So we were able to track their progress from beginning to end. And the 7,000 number is usually from community events like this where we give license cover advice. And so we usually get the follow-up or report back from them from kind of word of mouth, what they hear. So kind of speaking off the cuff, it would be between probably about 30 or 40% of those people that have followed through, because if it's been as simple as, you know what, you can reinstate, you just need to pay the $60, and they just didn't know that because they didn't take the time to do it. Or a lot of times is what happens is once they get the license recovery advice, they'll come back through our doors and enroll. Because especially if it's, they thought that they could afford the payment plan, or they thought it was as simple as that, and then they find themselves pulled over again. So we don't have too much concrete data on the advice unless they come in and enroll, and we can track their progress. And then the other piece is probably about 30 to 40% that follow through if it's a simple step.
Well, Jay and Susan, we'd like to thank you on behalf of SDC for all of the informative and pertinent information that you have given us all. This is definitely something that we'll be able to take out into our community, to our families, and spread the word, especially because you said something specifically to it pertaining to poverty. People don't understand a lot of times when it comes to poverty, it's those small things that we forget about that still fall under the category of poverty. And in our community, non driver's license or suspended driver's license or all of those things like that that they discussed today actually falls under the category of poverty. So again, we thank you. SDC appreciates you, and we look forward to hearing from you again in the future.